Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are beginning the 2046 offseason. It was a mixed result for the Pirates last year. We collapsed down the stretch and ended up finishing second in the NL Central, 8 games behind Milwaukee. When we did get into the playoffs, though, we won a wild card series and then we won a divisional series before falling in 7 games to the Colorado Rockies in the National League Championship Series. So, although the season was ultimately not successful in terms of winning the championship, it was the most successful season that we've had. We've now completed 9 seasons as general manager of the Pirates. We've had 7 winning records, 7 playoff seasons, and making it to Game 7 of the NLCS is as far as we brought this team in the postseason. Coming off a year where we finally gotten fan interest up to a decent point, you can see we sold out most of our games last year, and we had a real successful season financially, which gave us a bump to $164 million for the upcoming season in terms of our budget, which will be tied for 24th, which is the highest we've ever been. You can see the theoretical payroll right now is 20th in baseball, but that's with our scouting and our development pulled way back to be able to actually afford that. And when you look at expected salaries for this coming season, we've got a lot of arbitration eligible players, and some of the more expensive ones we probably will be needing to move on from. Most notably our closer, Ricky Rios, who's expected to make almost $17 million next year. Our ace starting pitcher, Luis Longoria, is only scheduled to make 14.4-ish in arbitration, or expected, I would say would be a more accurate way to describe that rather than scheduled. So we might be able to keep him around, but we're going to have to see what we can get for Rios, longtime third baseman and second baseman Willie Medrano and Bobby Guzman. I guess not long-term, medium-term third baseman and second baseman Willie Medrano and Bobby Guzman, who have both been here the last 2 years, also getting pretty expensive. And then oft-injured first baseman Luis Flores is also starting to get pretty expensive as far as his arbitration numbers. And we've got a team option that we're going to have to decide what to do with for longtime starter Bobby Gonzalez. And then, even some of our other players, Henry Gonzalez, Ethan Mingo, Mike Wright, Arturo Arellano, Juan Castillo have pretty big arbitration numbers this year. So a lot of big decisions that we're going to need to make to ultimately get the payroll kind of back in line, maybe in the high 90s, close to 100 million perhaps, which will allow us to put some more money back into scouting and development potentially. So the first thing we're going to have to do is figure out what to do with our arbitration eligible players. You can see we've already made offers to Street, Robles, Wright, Gonzalez, and Arellano. We've got decisions to make on a lot of the others, most notably what we're going to do with Ricky Rios, or honestly what we can get for Ricky Rios. I've been doing some searching of potential trades, and given that he's going to be a very good closer, but a closer who's going to be making close to $17 million likely next year, not a ton of demand for him, unfortunately. And even when we're trying to work out some theoretical trades, he doesn't add a lot to the mix because he's so expensive, unfortunately. And then the last interesting decision we're going to have to make, starting pitcher Alex Rojas, who's been with us for a season and a half, picked him up in a trade with Toronto, 37-year-old, is looking for almost $22 million a year over 3 years. We have the opportunity to submit a qualifying offer to him. I certainly don't want him back at $21-22 million for 3 years, or even at $19 million for 1 year. But I'm going to have to figure out before we get to free agency, do I want to submit a qualifying offer to him and take the risk that he'll sign that 1 year deal with us rather than hit the open market? because that would definitely derail what we can potentially do this offseason. Obviously, as I talked about, if we brought him back for $18.9 million, it will more than derail what we would recover by taking Rios at potentially close to $17 million off the books. So a tough decision there as far as our potential free agents also that we'll need to figure out. Thinking about this last season for the Pirates, obviously was ultimately a solid year. Our pitching and our defense were incredible. Our offense not that great, 10th in the league in runs scored, 13th in home runs. Going to have to find a way to score more runs. And unfortunately, when I look at the pending free agents, there are a few big bats out there, but they're all looking for 27, 44, 32, 33 million. And those are just numbers that we are not going to be able to afford. So we're going to have to look to the trade market, I think, for some help. What I'm hoping we'll be able to do is perhaps get rid of Flores and maybe either a Guzman or a Medrano in a deal as kind of cornerstones for a team that we're trading with to bring back someone with a decent bat in return. So that's going to be kind of our first goal here in the very early stages of this offseason. So I mentioned that we need to find a bat. Very simple search on the transaction screen, just looking for someone with 60 contact, 60 power, and a 60 eye. And you can see there's only about a dozen players in Major League Baseball who meet those criteria, including Angel Aguilar, who, as many of you like to remind me, we did trade away in an ill-fated trade several seasons ago, and all he's done is become one of the best hitters in baseball since we got rid of him. But he's making a lot of money now too. That's the issue with a lot of these players, is that they're making insane money, or they're 23 years old, like Raimundo Beltrametti, and obviously a great-looking bat, who coming off a year where he hit 280 with 28 homers and 100 ribbies as a 22-year-old. Clearly the price for somebody like him is going to be exorbitant, as it should be. So we're going to have to figure out if we're going to go for one of these top of baseball kind of power hitters, average hitters, how we could potentially fit one into the wage situation that we're dealing with the Pirates. And after doing a lot of proposed trades and just kind of trying to figure things out, we're kind of honing in on Lupe Zelaya, a 28-year-old first baseman for the Phillies, and that $5.4 million that he's making sounds, the Pirates can afford that. The issue is it's going up to 12, 19, and then close to 26 million a year into his early to mid 30s after, and actually it's going to be 12.3 million next year. This 2046 is already over with. So he's going to be making like $12 million next year. But he is a two-time All-Star and a one-time Silver Slugger winner, who you can see has been a very good offensive player. Not the type of player that I typically love to have on my team. Certainly would love to have a guy with a 136 OPS plus, 136 WRC plus, who over the last 3 years, his worst year is a 260 batting average with 35 homers, 96 ribbies, and 97 walks. Very good offensive player, but doesn't bring anything to the table defensively, has no speed. I like to have good defensive players, but we're kind of at a point in this playthrough where we need to have a bat, and a left-handed bat is where we're definitely lacking. So a left-handed proven power bat is something for us to think about bringing on board. But honestly, if I brought a player like Zelaya on board, I'd kind of want to have a roster set up so he could be a DH most of the time. Even though first base is not a critical defensive position, we have kind of built our success in this playthrough around pitching and defense, and I don't want to totally abandon that. But I think Zelaya is the most realistic target for us. and honestly still one of the least expensive targets out there for us. And the good news is we can actually get Zelaya straight up for 7 different people within our organization. The bad news is that they're our top players or our top pitchers or our top prospects, and they are all making a lot less money than he's potentially going to be making down the line, I guess with the exception of Longoria. But particularly with the fact that we know we're not going to be able to bring Rios back, there is a part of me that would like to try to bring Longoria back for one final year before he hits free agency. Hopefully we can make a run at the World Series next year, and I think having a pitcher like him on board would help with that. So the good news is we can definitely get a trade done for Zelaya. The bad news is that we don't really want to give up one of these top players for him, and we also ultimately want to put a deal together where the Phillies will be keeping a chunk of his salary. So that's what we're going to be working on now. And trading away arbitration eligible and very injury prone Luis Flores is one step in the right direction. You can see that there are more players now that will make this deal work. So that means that the Phillies do value Flores somewhat. Good contact hitter, also a left-handed bat, and he's a little better defensively at first base with a great personality. But he's fragile, he's almost as old, and his injury history is just brutal at this point. He's been up in the majors 5 years now, and he's never even played 80 games in a season. So it's probably time for us to move on from him, particularly given the fact that he's going to be making over $7 million next year, most likely, if we do try to bring him back. And we pieced together an offer for Zelaya where the Phillies will retain half of his contract. So at $6.15 million next year, and even at $9.5 million the year after, that's something that can work for the Pirates for the next 2 years. I think when we're going to be on the hook for about $13 million a year in the later years of this contract, that could get tricky for us. But at least it's, a much more easily tradable contract at around $13 million a year for whoever receives it, rather than around 26. And as I said, I don't love the lack of speed. I don't love the lack of defense. I don't even love that he's really got no extra base power, because he's got weak gap power and not a lot of speed. You can see he hasn't hit a triple in the last few years, and it's normally 20 to 25 doubles, which for a guy who's batting close to 600 at bats a season is not a lot of extra base power. He's kind of a feast or famine home run walk hitter. But he's been a pretty proven major league hitter and would definitely help our lineup. So even though he doesn't necessarily fit the perfect profile for me, I think he's the best, most realistic option we have out there now. We have to include Willie Madrano, who's been our third baseman the last couple years. Good, solid third baseman. You can see he's been, at least last year, a little above average in terms of his OPS plus, but has still put up less than 2 WAR each season. And he's in line to be making about $9 million in arbitration this year. So that, similar to Flores, is kind of addition by subtraction. But we've got to give up 3 decent prospects also, but not super prospects, but decent prospects. Center fielder Roger Zamora, probably the weakest of the 3. Good range, good speed. Just don't think that the former 16th round draft pick is ever going to hit enough to be in the majors, although he did hit 344 in A-ball last year. Danny Pietri is one that hurts a little bit more. He was our international free agent signing 3 years ago. Hit only 233 in A-ball this year, but looks like he could be very good defensively, lots of speed, and a decent major league hitter. He's also durable. Not a great prospect, but certainly looks like a guy who could help at the major league level. And then starting pitcher Franklin Renteria was a 3rd-round pick of ours 4 years ago. Was 16-5 with a 3.83 ERA in Double-A this year. Certainly looks like he could be a back end of the rotation, useful major league pitcher. Going to be turning 23 years old soon. So, Renteria and Pietri definitely hurt as far as I'm concerned. Zamora happy to include. Flores is addition by subtraction, and Medrano a little less so than Flores because at least he's been a healthy, somewhat productive major league player. But I don't think we can afford $9 million for a slightly above replacement level type third baseman anymore. We'll go with some youth instead. So we are going to kick off this offseason right here on day one with a huge trade, trading for hopefully designated hitter who's going to be a cornerstone of our lineup and help us score more runs next year. And the thing that I do like about it, we didn't have to give up any of our pitching yet to make that trade. Renteria is obviously a guy who 2, 3, 4 years from now could be helping us at the back end of the rotation, but we haven't weakened our pitching staff at all to bring Zelaya on board. So we are going to complete the trade, and definitely going to put us in a very different financial situation than we just were, because we've taken a couple of big salaries off the books for next year, or potential big salaries. Fans not pleased that we let Flores go. Players not either. No one happy that Medrano's gone. Knew that was going to happen. But fans are ecstatic that we brought on Zelaya. So hopefully that'll offset some of the pain there. Yeah, we ended up losing a point in terms of fan interest, but you can see now our money for free agents is looking better. Now, granted, we're ultimately going to put a lot of this money back into scouting and development, but things are moving in a little bit better direction in terms of getting the finances in line for next season. We're just going to need to find a first baseman and a third baseman, and we think we've got the first baseman potentially with David Green, who filled in for Flores most of last year, led the league with 48 doubles and hit 300. Not your prototypical first baseman because he doesn't have a ton of home run power. Still may look to do something else in the offseason, but think that he can help there. And Bobby Guzman could potentially move over to third for us. He's been a second baseman for us 2 seasons ago. Last year, he was more of a utility guy after we made the big trade for Castillo, but certainly has a very good glove. He's also headed to arbitration. His number's not expected to be quite as high as Medrano's was, but I think between second, even third, and short, particularly given the fact that we're probably going to also be moving on from longtime shortstop Tony Cota this offseason, keeping Guzman around may make sense for us at this point. And given that we are, I think, going to move on from our soon-to-be 31-year-old great defensive shortstop Tony Cota, he's looking for 4 years, around $8 million a year. He's never been a average offensive player for us, at least in terms of his OPS plus or his WRC plus. Has put up about 2 WAR based on his defense when he's been a respectable bat, and less than 1 WAR, a season ago when he was a brutal bat. But I do think that bringing Guzman back and then bringing Juan Castillo back, who was the second baseman we brought on in the big trade for Isaiah Hill last year, led the team with a 4.5 WAR. Another guy who can play second, third, or short for us. Both of these guys are not as good defensively as Cota, but they're still solid, respectable defensive players, and think that definitely want to consider bringing both of them back. So we made an arbitration offer to Guzman. We made an arbitration offer to Nelson Ibarra, who's been our starting catcher the last few years. Really good defensively, but just hasn't hit much. Does still have 2 option years if we end up doing something where we don't need him as a starter. We're also trying to bring Mario Quiroz, who spent all of last year in AAA, former backup catcher for us, and Ethan Mingo, who spent all of last year in AAA when we were kind of suffering from an embarrassment of riches as far as our pitching staff. Kind of need Mingo back now with the likes of Ballesteros, Rojas moving on, the potential we're going to be moving on from Rios also. Unfortunately, because those guys were both in AAA last year for the whole season, they're pretty bitter at us and don't want to talk extension. So we are going to just have to go to arbitration with both of those players. We'll offer $5.1 million for Mingo, which is getting expensive, but he is a player who could start or relieve for us, and he had been pretty effective at the major league level. As I mentioned, he was a starter in AAA for us next year, but still a pretty useful arm for us. And we'll keep an offer at $1 million for Quiros. I think a raise for a guy who had a brutal year in AAA. I would think we'd win that in arbitration, even though he doesn't want to talk to us. So that leaves us with the big decisions: Rios, Luis Longoria, and Juan Castillo. And Rios, it's time to see what we can get in trade for him. We can't afford almost $17 million for a reliever. Not exactly sure what we're going to get for him in terms of prospects. But might as well see what the market looks like for a excellent closer who's going to be making a ton of money. We'll take a look and see if there's anything that makes sense. And it's kind of sad that the trade market for Ricky Rios is basically trash. Got players making insane amounts of money who aren't that good. Bill Gonzalez probably stands out if you're just looking at the 4 stars here. The issue is that he's a guy who wants to be a starter, even though he probably doesn't have the third pitch to be all that effective for it. And you can see as a starter with the Yankees primarily, he put up a 5.40 ERA. He's been brilliant as a reliever in the past. But he's going to be making $20-25 million a year for the next several years. So he's a pitcher who could be a great bullpen arm, but I don't want to be spending $25 million on a great bullpen arm. If I wanted to spend that kind of money, I could just bring Ricky Rios back at $17 million. If the Yankees will keep a ton of his contract, I'd consider doing it, but I don't think there's any way the Yankees are going to keep the amounts that we'd want them to. Actually, they would keep 80% of his contract. The Yankees would keep that whole contract. That may be our best alternative. I can't believe the Yankees can afford to keep that whole horrible contract. The issue is he's going to be kind of angry because he's been promised that he's going to be a starter, and we're going to plug him in as a reliever. But he is extremely popular. He's an Iron Man. I guess it's a nice situation for the Yankees that they can afford to just waive that salary because he's a really good bullpen arm. And if we're not spending any money on him for the next 5 years or the next 6 years, since they signed him to that absolutely stupid extension, I think that works for us. He's by far the best player out there that people would trade for Rios, and the fact that we don't have to spend any money on. You've all been looking at this screaming at me. They're willing to keep the 100% of the $9.8 million, but that's the current contract. The new contract hasn't kicked in, so of course they'll give it to us. They don't care. They've already spent the $9.8 million this year. Yeah, we'll pay that, you stupid idiots in Pittsburgh. But we would have been on the hook for that huge contract after that. So that's not going to work either. That didn't make sense to me. I'm glad I figured that out before I did something really stupid. But there's just not a lot out there for Rios, unfortunately. And this is really sad, but with the arbitration number for Ricky Rios, and the pretty difficult trade settings that we're on, we're better off just letting him go for nothing than taking on any of these players, in my opinion. Some of them have horrible personalities, some of them just have horrible contracts, and we can't get anyone to retain enough of those horrible contracts that it's not just trading one bad contract for an even worse contract for us. So sadly, we're going to let Ricky Rios go for nothing, which really hurts because he's a really good pitcher. But at least that guarantees that he'll be on the open market, and maybe he'll find that there's not a lot of demand for a $16 million, $17 million closer. But I tend to think he'll find somebody to give him close to that. But there's just not a trade out there that makes sense. I guess the good news is that that's going to open up even more money for us when we do get through this arbitration period. I am leaning at this point towards gambling in submitting the qualifying offer to Rojas to get the draft pick compensation, hopefully. Again, he's looking for close to $22 million a year over 3 years. It's definitely risky to put the $18.9 million out there. But I'm going to roll the dice and see what happens with that. And Juan Castillo, we've already talked about. He's the guy we got in the trade for superstar Isaiah Hill. Pretty good bat this past year, 282, 32 doubles, 24 homers, 134 OPS plus, 131 WRC plus. Pretty solid defensive infielder. Be 27 next year. He's willing to talk long-term contract with us, looking for a little less than $15 million a year over 8 years. I don't think we can spend that much on him, but I am willing to see if we can lock him up for several seasons. We are nearing the point with Castillo. If I can find him, where he's expected to make. He's got 3 more arbitration years left, 5.5, 10, $13 million expected. We may be able to buy out those 3 arbitration years for a bit less money than he would have been making in arbitration and get optionality on a couple of free agency years. Who knows whether we'll keep him or not, or we'll have to trade him away. But I think it's worth at least seeing if we can do something a little shorter and a little less money than what he's looking for right now. So Castillo, as I talked about, was looking at 8 years, almost 15 a year. We're offering him a 6 at an average of 13 a year. I don't think he'll go for that, but want to at least see what the conversation looks like. And he's willing to think about it. So if we do that, we'd be getting him, we're paying a little more than his arbitration number this upcoming season, but we would be less than his expected arbitration numbers in 2048 and 2049, and then have 15, 18, and 18 for his free agency years, including a team option to get us out of the last year. So it's not an untradeable contract in my mind if our salary situation down the line is more difficult, and it does get a pretty good young player who could be the cornerstone of our infield at either second base, shortstop for the next several years locked up. So we're going to go ahead and submit that 6-year, $78 million offer to him. And then that leaves us with the last of the big arbitration decisions, Mr. Luis Longoria. With that fragile injury proneness, but those 3 brilliant pitches, exceptional stuff and movement, he doesn't necessarily know where it's going. We've had him on a 90 pitch count for the last several years, and you can see we've gotten full seasons out of him each year. coming off a great year with 257 strikeouts, made the All-Star team for the third time, even though he only won 7 games. I feel like we've been walking a tightrope with this guy every year because he's so fragile. But the 90 pitch count and having him on an aggressive tiredness hook, we've been able to get him through these seasons. And with the money we freed up by not making an offer to Rios, there's still value in Longoria. Is he on the 26-man roster when next year begins? Maybe, maybe not. But his arbitration number is only supposed to be around 14.4 million. So we're going to at least make an offer to him. And he'll sign a long-year deal at $30 million a year. We don't want to do that. He's probably not going to like the $14 million that we offer him so much, that we offer him right now, since he's looking for so much money and he's willing to do such a long deal with us. But we'll see what he thinks about it. He's willing to think about it. So 1 year at $14 million for Longoria, that could be decent if he stays healthy. Because then we're bringing back a really good rotation for next year. And we've added a big bat already to our lineup. We've got a hole at closer, but it's not an insurmountable hole in my opinion. So I like what we've done so far, even though we're only moments into this offseason. So we've either non-offered in the case of Rios, or traded away in the case of Flores and Medrano, several of our more expensive arbitration-eligible players. Made offers to pretty much everyone else at this point. So the one other thing we've got to figure out is whether or not Bobby Gonzalez is coming back. We've got a team option for him at $4.8 million next year. He's getting closer to the point where he's more of a bullpen arm, so he would be an expensive bullpen arm for someone who's going to turn 37 next year. But he has really been a good pitcher since we picked him up. You can see started over 30 games for us for eight straight years, with one exception when he only started 29 games. So he has been an absolute workhorse for us. He is an Iron Man as far as injury proneness. He's not a great pitcher. 3.90 ERA over his 8 years with us, 98 and 78 record, but still has put up a 25 WAR and a 3.40 SIERA over that time. He's getting near the point where we start to worry about him, but he is a left-handed arm, and he is a guy who could be a 5th starter for us next year. So I think we're going to execute the option and bring Gonzalez back. With the likes of Arroyo and Valadez, and even another pitcher that we haven't talked about too much yet, Dylan Smith, who's in AAA. We've got a lot of young arms coming up, so there's no guarantee that Gonzalez is going to be in the rotation, because obviously we're trying to bring Longoria back now, and Longoria and Street would headline the top 2 spots in the rotation. But I feel like if bringing Gonzalez back, we don't have to do anything with our pitching this offseason. So we're just getting into a point where figure out which youngsters we want to bring up into the everyday lineup, and then maybe try to fill a hole or two when we get to free agency. So I think at this point, going to start simming and seeing how many of these guys we can sign. Cross our fingers that Rojas won't accept the qualifying offer and we'll get some draft pick compensation. And then we've made offers to the minor league free agents that we potentially want to bring back already. So I think the big work of the early stages of this offseason is done for us. Just a matter of seeing how much we can boost fan interest, signing some of those popular young arbitration eligible players to their 1-year deals before we have to go to a hearing. And hopefully that will help us a bit, because we are going to be taking some hits in fan interest when Augustini and Vivar and hopefully Rojas, Ballesteros, some other players leave as free agents, including Rios. So it's going to be an interesting offseason, but I feel we've added a really big bat. We've weakened our infield defense a bit, and we've obviously lost our closer. But we had great pitching with Rios. I think we'll have great pitching without Rios. And I think that the addition of Zelaya is going to give our offense a dimension that we just haven't really had in recent years. The big power hitter right in the middle of the order. Obviously, we did have that for a long time with Isaiah Hill. And we just couldn't afford him anymore. But Zelaya, with the fact that we've got the Phillies paying half of his contract for the next several years, again, it still may get too expensive for us. But the next couple seasons, I think it's a very reasonable contract for a guy who's proven that he is a really good major league hitter. And some good news here. Longoria signed his extension. The fans are pleased. You can see we were also signing a bunch of minor league free agents. Bobby Guzman signed the arbitration offer with us. Henry Gonzalez will be back next year. So it looks like only Longoria. Actually, that's not true, because Danny Robles has signed, and the fans were pleased with that. Nelson Ibarra going to be back. Arturo Arellano will be back, and the fans a little happy about that. Sean Street, fans pleased with that. So several that helped our fan interest, it sounds like, most notably Street and Longoria, up to a 96 in fan interest. Again, that's kind of a temporary number, because we know that we're going to be losing a lot of players this offseason, but just need to hear from that big contract offer that we made to Juan Castillo. And then Mingo and Quiroz we're going to go to arbitration with, because they're bitter that they were in AAA and don't want to talk to us. And we're unfortunately going to move on from Ricky Rios. So just waiting to hear from Juan Castillo right now on that 6-year offer that we made to him. I think right now, given that fan interest is pretty good, the team's been pretty successful, we're going to keep ticket prices right where they are. I know some of you are telling me I should raise them right now, and I hear where you're coming from, but I do fear that when we lose Augustini, Vivar, Rojas, Herrera, Cota, Ballesteros, and Rios, we're going to be taking some hits there. So we'll see what fan interest looks like before we get to the winter meetings, before we have to decide one way or another. But I do think it's going to be trending in a negative direction from here at this point, unfortunately. And Juan Castillo has signed that deal that buys out his 3 arbitration eligible years and his first 3 years of free agency. Fans really excited by that, which is great. Taking a look at fan interest, and we're at 99, so almost to the, for the Pirates, extremely unattainable 100 level in fan interest. As I said, that's kind of it as far as the positives right now, so we're going to be moving back in a more negative direction. But definitely good to get the cornerstone of the trade for Isaiah Hill signed for the next 6 years. Whether he'll end up being similar to Isaiah Hill and we'll have to trade him away in 3 or 4 seasons when he starts making big money and he's in his early 30s, that's quite a plausible scenario for these Pirates. But we'll deal about that in the future and hope that we can keep fan interest high, keep generating more and more money, and keep getting old man Nutting to give us more and more money to spend each year. And it was a very quiet award season for the Pirates. No Gold Gloves, no Silver Sluggers. Obviously, none of the big awards. Taking a look at the NL reliever of the year, a former Pirate, Manny Colazzo, who we couldn't afford a few years ago, outpointed a current Pirate who we can't afford for next season, Ricky Rios, for the reliever of the year, and Greg Gaylord, who has won that award a couple of seasons ago and will likely be our closer next year with Rios gone, did get some attention and some votes for that award. Rookie of the Year, David Green, who we talked about earlier, finished third in the voting. Got all 30 third place votes, it looks like, with Caden Williams and Marcus McCaskill of the Cubs not sweeping, but getting all of the first and second place votes. American League Cy Young Award, Rogelio Luera, who is making a case as the greatest pitcher in baseball history at this point, especially if he does it for a few more years. Left-hander, is only 34 years old, and you can see he has led the league in strikeouts now 11 consecutive seasons, with some absolutely crazy numbers, 400 strikeout seasons for him. Only was 19-6 this past year with 377 strikeouts and a 2.14 ERA, 57 FIP minus, 8.7 WAR. Kind of a down year for him, sadly, but he is obviously an incredible pitcher. National League, Alex Pacheco of the Giants, almost a unanimous winner. Former Pirate, current Cardinal, Tony Machuca was the only other one who got a first place vote. Can see our guy Longoria finished fifth in the voting. It'd be nice to have him back next year. And then for the MVP awards, Angel Aguilar, the gift that keeps on giving, wins his first MVP award in 2046. The guy who could have been in the middle of our lineup. Although at this point, going to be making about $24.6 million next year through arbitration, most likely. So getting to the point where he would be very difficult for us to afford, but obviously would be a nice decision if we had to make that. And Rich Gilbo, former number 1 overall pick back in 2042, gets his first Most Valuable Player award for the hated Brewers, leading the league in batting average, hits, and WAR. Taking a look at the voting, Juan Castillo, who we just signed to that extension, got a few votes for the Most Valuable Player. And our old buddy Isaiah Hill, who we traded away for him, got some MVP votes too. But you remember he was a 2-time MVP with us. Did lead the NL in 47 homers this year. Hit 277, 47 homers, 116 ribbies. So a vintage Isaiah Hill season for the Dodgers. But he was getting paid $29 million while doing it, and he's going to be making in the 30s for the next couple of years. So although he still a great player, hate to lose that bat. Those are the economic realities of managing a team like the Pirates with an owner like Robert Nutting. And in our defense, I will say that the 3.8 WAR that Hill put up was the lowest in his career, and his WAR has now fallen for 3 consecutive seasons. So although would have loved that bat in our lineup this year, especially with our inability to score runs, I still think it was the right move for us for the long term. So we're closing in on the arbitration hearings at this point. As I said, Mingo and Quiroz wouldn't talk to us because we had them spend the year in AAA. We'll make one last chance to shop Ricky Rios around. I guess we'll look at anyone that people are willing to give us for him. I can't imagine there's going to be much different demand than there was a couple of weeks ago, but we'll at least take a look. You can see it's all big contracts coming back. So I don't think there's anything really to do here. But we'll double check on it just to make sure if we can extract some tiny amount of value from him, we'll try to do it. And sadly, although we've added in veterans, it just looks like we can get a lot more big and bad contracts with older players, players without great personalities for Rios. So probably nothing to do here. We'll see if someone's willing to keep a huge chunk of one of these bad contracts and just make sure that there's not something slightly interesting for us to do. But before we do that, I wanted to check in on a couple of our former players that we had offered to us. Luis Linares, who we had picked up near the beginning of this playthrough from the Royals and was our starting shortstop for 2.5 years, making $22.2 million now for the Cubs. Why he's not with us anymore? He's making too much money. Very good defensive player, and he's hit okay for the Cubs over the last few years. Hasn't been an all-star in 3 seasons or 4 seasons now at this point. And then Ricky Gotti, our former ace, who signed that massive contract with the Cubs several years ago. You can see he's not even a starting pitcher anymore for them, and he hasn't been great. So that's a situation I'm feeling pretty good about. You can see we had some really nice years from Gotti through his late 20s, and now in 4 years with the Cubs, he started only 8 games for them, so clearly had some injury issues. He's fragile physically, and they think that he's better suited for the pen at this point. But a decent reliever to be paying someone like that $21 million a year is a brutal contract at this point. So would feel better for Gotti if he had some more success, but I think it was the right move for us to not pay that contract to him. And I think we may try to extract some value for Rios by bringing on our old friend Luis Linares as a potential shortstop for us. You can see we can get the Cubs to retain 85% of his contract. So we would be on the hook for about $3.3 million a year for him for the next few years. Certainly is good enough to defensively play shortstop for us every day. The bat at this point is not that great, but given the excellent defense, even if he's a $3.3 million utility infielder for us for the next few years, I think there's some value there. Now, he is fragile, but we're not necessarily going to be relying on him to be an everyday player for us. We have to give up Rios, who we were going to let go for nothing anyways. Have to give up starting pitcher Tony Liriano, who is a decent back end of the rotation kind of starter. We picked him up 8 months ago in a trade with the Twins right before the start of the season. He spent the whole year in AAA for us. He's a solid pitcher. The issue is that he's out of major league options at this point, and I don't think he makes our team next year, so we'd have to be able to get him through waivers. So I'd rather just get something for him now. Second baseman Ippolito Andrade, former scouting discovery, not that good defensively, has decent speed, hasn't been above rookie ball for us, and hit only $1.65 in rookie ball this past year. Not a huge loss. John Moreno's the one that I question a bit. Soon to be 23-year-old, who's a durable starter. You can see he's got 3 major league quality pitchers, great personality, split this year between high A ball and double A ball, and was pretty successful at both levels, combining for a 13-10 record. But he's a fly ball pitcher who only throws in the low to mid 90s to be fair, without great movement on his pitches. I just think he's going to give up a ton of home runs at the major league level. There definitely is value there, but I think there's also value in having a great defensive shortstop. Well, not great, but a well above average defensive shortstop who can hit-ish a little bit. Linares is not what he once was, but still has put up a 90 OPS plus and an 89 WRC plus over the course of his career. So he's not an automatic out. He's good defensively at 3 key positions. And we know that we're only going to be spending $3.3 million on him, with the fact that the Cubs are going to retain most of that awful contract that they signed him to. I think there's value in a good, very good defensive player as a utility infielder who's experienced. It gives us a little bit of value for Rios. I don't love giving up Moreno, and I don't love giving up Liriano, but we weren't going to likely guarantee him a major league contract to be in the minors next year anyways. So at least we're getting something for him. I'm probably making more of this trade than it needs to be. I don't think it's going to be a pennant winner or a pennant loser for us either way, because I just question how useful Moreno is going to ultimately be at the major league level. But I do like the fact we're bringing on a very good defensive infielder who we've got for the next several years at pretty low money. And he's not just an automatic out. He could, at least for the next year or two, replace the soon-to-be departed Tony Cota as a excellent defensive infielder at shortstop for us. He's not as good defensively as Cota, but he's also a better hitter than Cota has been over the course of his career, and we'll be spending about $6 million, $5 million less a year on Linares than we would have on Cota. So I think it makes sense for us to do this trade. Ricky, thanks for everything you've done for the Pirates. Sorry that we can't afford to pay you $16+ million a year to be our closer. And the fans obviously not happy that Rios is gone. I did tell you that I expected our fan interest to be trending in the wrong direction, so just getting an early start on that. It did take a 4-point hit, so it was not immaterial, but you can see getting that money for Rios officially off the books now has us in a situation where we can boost our scouting and development budgets kind of closer to where we'd want them to be, and still have a little bit of money to spend in the upcoming offseason. So now it really is just waiting on the hearings for Mingo and Quiroz. Hopefully we can get both of those guys back, because they do potentially have bigger roles, particularly Mingo, to play with our pitching staff next year than he did this past year. Quiroz could still end up in AAA, but for $1 million, I think he's pretty good insurance at the catcher position for us behind Ibarra and Rodriguez. And we've got our salary arbitration hearings today. Let's see how they go. Oh, that hurts. Alex Rojas accepted the qualifying offer. Oof. Quiroz, we won the case. Mingo, even though he spent all of last year in AAA, he won his case. But we gambled and lost on Alex Rojas, so that hurts, because we are going to have to find someone to take that contract away from us. We don't need an extra pitcher at this point, and we can't afford to be paying almost $19 million for him next year. So we got burned, getting a little greedy, trying to get the draft pick compensation. And he's still a pending free agent right now, technically, so we can't trade him right now. Got to wait a couple days to see how painful it's going to be for us to try to get out of that contract. But you got to know when to hold him. You got to know when to fold him. And we probably should have folded on that one. And we are to free agency, so we'll take a quick look at the international free agents. If there's anything particularly interesting out there, does not appear to be anyone who's going to be a franchise changer. Israel Muniz, decent catcher. I'd sign him to a minor league contract, but I'm guessing he's looking for big money. Oh, he is actually just looking for a minor league contract. All right, I don't think he's ever going to hit enough, but he's got a good personality, good defensively. We'll offer you a minor league deal. See what he thinks about that. Then the big time free agents. Starting pitcher Isaiah Bird. Third baseman Jesus Wheaton. Oof. It's a nice bat. I know he's going to be making a ton of money. There's also the first baseman from the Mets. Yeah, Edgar Simpson. Another big time bat that's going to be available. Would love to bring him on board too, but I don't think we can afford it. A few younger players. 28-year-old left fielder Juan Rivas. Again, I'm just dreaming about some of these guys because I'm sure we won't be. Ricky Ariza, guy that we talked about many, many, many years ago. I believe when he was drafted by the Mets. How did he get onto the Mets? If I looked at his history, I would be able to figure that out. Can't remember whether we looked him at the... Okay, it must have been back when we were with Kansas City because he's been in the majors since, or prospect since 2030, but number one or number two prospect for most of his minor league years. I think he was one of the guys who was a big player at the top of the draft 15 plus seasons ago that I remember looking at, but he's obviously had a nice career for the Mets. Ton of gold gloves, brilliant defensively. So another guy out there who would be interesting to bring on. A few older players, Agostini, who was on our team this year, Pineda, 38-year-old starter. Take a look at it this way of the free agents now, and you can see, looking at the pitchers, a lot of interesting guys out there, some of whom we may be able to afford, but again, I don't think we really need a pitcher. And then the batters. Who is this? Yoshitaro Nakahara, 33-year-old left fielder from Japan who's only supposedly looking for $2.6 million. I mean, he's wrecked physically. He's not much of a leader. But he is a guy who's hit 31, 24, and 29 homers the last few years in San Diego. He's wrecked physically, but he's an interesting bat. Always strange when you see those rare players whose overall ability is viewed as higher than their potential. Probably a sign of someone who's headed in the wrong direction. He's only looking for 1 year, $2.6 million. He's somebody, is a fourth or fifth outfielder, left-handed bat. Still looks like he's got a pretty nice bat against right-handers, except he's going to strike out a ton. But there may be some value there for our offense. So we've got a lot to think about as we head into this off season. I am actually going to see if we can find out what we can get for Mr. Rojas yet. I'm guessing we're going to have to pay to get that contract off the books. Yeah, there's a lot of crappy contracts we can get in return for him, and that's about it. Oh, there are some guys making not much money. They might not be very good. That may be the tax that we have to pay. Ooh, there's actually even a minor leaguer out there. So we'll be able to get him off of the books. So we'll kind of figure out in our next episode how to get Rojas off of the books, which will open up even a little more money for us as far as our salaries, because we don't want him to be the highest paid player on our team this coming year. And as I mentioned, with Longoria and Street back to lead the rotation, and potentially having guys like Mingo, Gonzalez, Alex Arroyo, Bobby Astorga, Sal Valadez, and the other youngster that we mentioned, Devin Smith, to potentially come up into the rotation and help us as much as Arroyo is, or not Arroyo, as much as Rojas is a proven, inexperienced major league pitcher. I don't think spending close to $19 million on him next year is the right thing for these Pirates to be doing. So we will look to move on from him also at the start of our next episode when we get free agency going in earnest. But we've done a lot to really improve the salary structure of the team for this coming season. You can see we're at $111 million right now. So we're going to be down around $93-94 million when we move on from Rojas. I kind of like where we are financially at this point. I don't know if we're going to have enough money to make a crazy move in free agency, because you can see we've only got $17 million available right now, and theoretically we want to put a lot of that into scouting and development, but that number will be more like $36 million after we trade away Rojas. Actually, it'll probably be more like 32 or 33, because we'll probably have to take some kind of mediocre-ish contract back to get rid of him. But 32 or 33 million will probably give us $5 to $10 million that we can potentially spend to bring on some players to help us in the upcoming season. So it's definitely been an eventful start to the offseason. Would love to hear what you think about the moves we made, most notably the big trade for Zelaya, whether we should have just moved on for nothing from Rios, or whether bringing on Linares is a good defender in our infield makes sense. Whether we should have brought Longoria back or not. We did end up bringing him back. We brought Bobby Gonzalez back. So, again, I feel like our pitching is as good as it's ever been, even though we'll be moving on from Rojas and Rios. But our offense still needs more help. I think Zelaya is a good step in that direction, but hopefully we can do a little bit more this offseason to hopefully help us score more runs next year and get one step further in from the NLCS into the World Series. And we'll find out what type of progress we're able to make on improving our team in the effort to reach that goal in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.